So, like, I can tell you again, just like macro side, like the AI apps building on Clerk are growing so fast. Like, it's really unbelievable to watch. Um,
All right, we're here with Colin, the co-founder of Clerk. Colin, thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to have you here. Thank you for taking the time. Can you talk a little bit more about Clerk and its founding story?
yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me as well. Super excited to be here. But yeah, Clerk and its founding story. I guess, starting with just like what Clerk is today, we're known as auth for React. And so, if you're building an application with the React front end, your front end developers can kind of take Clerk and get moving with complete auth user management really quickly. And so we have really simple sign up, sign in user profile components. All the like 2FA comes out of the box, OAuth comes out of the box. Um, like secure password breach detection stuff comes out of the box. Like we really went um, as broad with the definition of like complete user management as we could. And yeah, it's been going all right. Um, Founding story wise, though, I think really it was just my brother and I, kinds of engineers that always had side projects going, and we just never really liked the auth part, right? Like it felt like we were cutting corners, or it felt like we were just spending too much time getting it going, and we just approached this problem of like, there's got to be a better way. Um, I'd say we actually initially approached it as like we're just going to copy everything Stripe did and apply it to auth, and it didn't work for us. And so that was this like very humbling moment where basically we ended up rebuilding Auth Zero is what happened. So like they're actually quite good and at being an API company, but I think what we learned and what our frustration um, was pulling data down to the front end and really just working in these modern application stacks. There's a lot of extra work that went into like actually delivering an end user experience around sign in and not just kind of sign in and user profiles and not just the blanket auth form. Um, so yeah, a mere, two and a half years later, things started to resonate and we're here today.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool to listen to your story. And I've seen firsthand you guys,
Yeah.
going against um, the like the hurdles that you saw. Can you tell me a little bit more? What was it about, like copying Stripe? So you mentioned you copy Stripe. What did you copy, and why do you think that didn't work, and what made it work?
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought of Stripe as just like very thoughtful around API design, and we were uh, looking at their URL structures and how there's like where the nouns are, where the verbs are, how the IDs are structured. We even went down to like the encoding level. Like they do this form encoding up and then JSON back down, and we copied that. Later on, we emailed like an early Stripe person, and we are like, "Why did you make that decision?" Because we just kind of blindly copied it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we probably wouldn't have done that today." And, yeah, that was humbling. We still kind of have that decision on our front end API, but we have a technical reason for it now. But yeah, like it was really just trying to get, like focus on their attention to detail. And I think what ended up happening was, we built a good API for auth, but the like audience today that's building applications, they're not in backends, right? They're not running uh, API requests with the secret key, um, or at least they don't want to for auth. And so what we did was we got rid of the secret key. We built this, publicly accessible API that the front end can run fetches against directly. Um, and basically like post up a username and password in the simplest way of thinking about it. Uh, but then we took it a step forward and we went into React world and we said, okay, like people probably don't just want like to run fetch, like they want a hook, and that hook should be issuing the fetches and returning back the user data. And so we have, a use sign in hook that steps through, uh, identify yourself, run the first factor, run the second factor, a sign up that collects information, and then after you're authenticated, there's a use user that's the user profile. Um, but then, so we had fetch, we layered on hooks, and then we're like, okay, let's go a step further, and we layered on components. And these components are really what the majority are using today. And it's an implementation of use sign in, use sign up, use user that it makes it so developers don't need to actually think through the UX of authentication. And I think, to some extent, if you look at Stripe, like they've figured this out as well, right? Like how many people are really implementing the charges API today versus checkout and billing portal and so on. So I think like Stripe has also figured out that it's kind of like the patience of developers has gone down, and we need to deliver end user experiences as a service rather than APIs as a service. And React's component model happens to just be really, really good for that from our perspective.
Interesting. So I think part of the theory that you're stating is that developer focused companies are moving up the stack. So they're moving up from APIs to actually components. And one example is Stripe, right? And another example might be Verso, right? Where
Yeah.
is that a trend that you're seeing across the board? And is that, is that what you're talking about? And yeah.
Yeah, I think so, right? I think of Versal and Next.js as they've made it so you don't have to buy a CDN anymore. And it's this like almost crazy sleight of hand they pulled off where because I'm building with Next.js and because I'm, running on a host that supports Next.js, like the CDN layer and all of the complexity of cache invalidation and so on is solved for me. And so I don't find myself wanting to ever buy a CDN. It's just out of the box. Um, and I think like there's this extra trend that's going on that maybe Stripe has figured out slightly less of than Vercel, where like if you can actually sell to the front end developer completely, the back end developer never really gets involved. And so we're seeing this a lot at Clerk, where like we don't have, I mean, we have a backend API key, and there's certain things that you do through the backend API that you can't do through the front end. But the simple parts of setting up sign in user profile, like you don't need to involve a backend developer at all. And I think the like somewhat profound shift that happened there is it always used to be backend developer integrates API, and then they have to do some in-house plumbing to get that data down to the front end, and then the front end developer has to work with it. And so, what Clerk's done is we've just pushed that. We've built the API on behalf of that backend team, and we're selling it directly to the front end developer. And I think Vercel definitely has, cracked that code in similar ways. And it's like a little harder to twist your mind around it as a API company because I don't think anyone's ever sold CDN as really an API. But like the work they did with Next Image is, very much CDN turned into component. So yeah, there's some kind of macro thing happening. I think developer tools as APIs are showing their cracks, and yeah, and the crack is ultimately just like find a way to help a developer move faster and they'll prefer it, right? Like nothing's changed that much about the developer persona. Like they just want to move as quickly as possible.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think in my perspective, we see a lot of, I think that's productivity gains, and we see that in different tooling, right? Like we see that I think in languages we move up the stack
Yeah,
over time. So we start with assembly, then I
exactly. Yeah.
mean, and then C, C++, and then so on. And I think for developers, that's kind of the trend that we're seeing. We're like moving up the stack, and that increases productivity. That's
Yeah.
super interesting. I hadn't realized the Vercel and like how developer tools are moving up the stack to the component layer. That's super
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Um,
I think no one's really talking about it this way. And I'm only trying to talk about it this way, right? Like I think these are the patterns I'm seeing. There's definitely some shift going on. That's my best attempt at verbalizing it.
no, that's a. I think it's a great insight, and yeah, I haven't seen that talked a lot about, but yeah, that's great. Um, can you? So, I mean, I've seen a graph. I think you share on Twitter
Yeah.
about maybe it's like user signups or user daily active users or things like
Yeah.
that, and there are clearly some inflection points.
Yep.
Um,
It's
did
exciting.
you perceive? Did you like actually see some inflection points in terms of like the features that you build and like the product that you build and like what do you think were these moments, these aha moments that you had?
Yeah. So for the longest time at Clerk, we had launched and like growth was stable and linear. Um, and like churn has never been bad. Um, but it just wasn't growing fast enough. And I think it took us a really long time to understand like what audience was it resonating with versus what it wasn't resonating with. Um, because ultimately it's like we would take a lot of these, customer research calls and like a lot of people were like passionately pro clerk and a lot were passionately anti clerk. And I think eventually we figured out this like um, front end back end developer distinction where the front end developer always cared about or never really cared about the implementation details of like how user data is stored and so on. And so the fact that we're just giving them an API they can run with, they really liked. Whereas backend developers would have all of these questions like how, what are the implementation details? I think, we really started to grok that around January. And I'm just gonna hope you're like overlaying this chart. But basically in January, we went from this, like 2%, 3% weekly growth to like, that Paul Graham sweet spot of like 5 to 7%. So if you haven't read the Paul Graham growth essay, he talks about how at YC like 5 to 7% weekly growth is good. Above that, it's like exceptional. Below that's bad. And so January and like January through March for us was like the first time we hit that, um, and like that finally felt really good. The inflection points after that. Okay, cool. You pulled it up here. So yeah, you can kind of see January. There's this first. There's the Christmas dip, uh, and then in January it starts to go up. Um, and then basically what happened since, like what happened in April was a YouTuber, um, Theo, picked it up and made this long form article about uh not just how to use Clerk, but like how to use this modern application stack. Um, and Clerk was part of it. And yeah, we got a ton of signups through that. But what was really interesting was after that, it also kind of sustained, where we were just getting this bigger base of signups every week. Um, and then at the tail end of this chart in July, It's basically the same thing. There's just more media being published about Clerk, and so it's snowballing. And I guess this is, the classic word of mouth. I don't like. I feel like I need to like knock on wood as I say this because I'm still in denial about. Yeah, so you can see this chart, right? It starts in 2021.
Yeah.
Before that, like I knew Giuliano in South Park Commons. That was in 2019 when we were there. So it's been like this crazy long journey, and it finally looks like it's going up. But yeah, like knock on wood, this is like the beginnings of real snowballing on word of mouth, and that's always been the hope for Clerk was that we can get the integration time so far down, like into a couple minutes, that it drives this wow effect and like I need to share this. Um, and yeah, we're starting to see that.
That's awesome. That's really cool to see. And yeah, I think a big part of it was you and your brother sticking to it and, just working through it and figuring out the pain points. And it's really, really cool to see this inflection point. I hope it continues. I mean, uh, I think, you guys have been working on this and understand the pain points and everything. So it seems that, you guys are in a really good path forward. So
Yeah,
that's really cool to see.
I mean, thank you. I think it has been, there was definitely like this distinct transition over time from like, copying Stripe to really just operating on first principles, trying to understand the customers. And you do, in everything now, it's like you feel more like this ninja that is able to predict customer needs and like build out a roadmap that's um gonna be more helpful for them. And so it's gotten a lot more fun over time, I think. And it's not just the growth, but yeah, it's just like you feel like you're operating like closer to perfection. And I think that's just fun. I don't know. I was also like an endurance athlete a little bit growing up, and so I don't know. There's like these similarities. It's very interesting.
Wait, so what kind of endurance athlete?
Uh,
That's cool.
I did both running in high school, and then in college I did rowing. Um, and I didn't row for long. It was honestly only a year, but then I ended up coaching rowing because I liked it so much, and I still there's actually like a rowing machine behind me. I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
you can
That's
see
cool.
you can see the track there, but yeah. I guess once you get to like a certain degree of fitness, you start dialing in on like technique, um, and that's where you end up finding gains. And there's something about that that just feels um, similar to me.
Yeah,
I don't know.
definitely. I think for yeah, Naval has this tweet: play long-term games with long-term people, and that seems what guys are doing. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the pain points that of user management that Clerk helps with? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, let's see. It's uh, all over the map, I'd say. So, first of all, when you're configuring Clerk, you can set like what fields are on your user profile, right? Like, do you have a name? Do you have a profile image? Um, do you have emails? Do you have phone numbers? Do you have 2FA enabled? Uh, there's we do active device management, right? So the ability to see which devices you're signed in on and to remotely sign out of them. We do like session length customization. So if you want your sessions to last a day or 7 days or a year, like we have all these options. There's, I think, a really surprising amount of depth to auth. I don't know that any of it is like hard per se, right? Like to some extent, it's like, oh, we're just following specs. But there is so much of it. I got an example right now. Is like we don't have passkey support yet. We don't have YubiKey support yet, and um, it's like we'll get there. Where the requests are piling up. I think, I'm not going to put a deadline on myself in this call, but like, um, auth is always changing, and that means that whether you use Clerk or not, like you need to have this persistent um, effort going into your auth and your user management system. Um, and so yeah, like we just kind of look for more and more bits of that and try to abstract it away. One fun one we do is user impersonation. And so we actually have like support teams now that kind of live in the Clerk dashboard throughout their day. And whenever they get a request from a customer, they can go and sign in as that customer and like see what they're seeing. Um, and I think that's a fun example just because it's like, okay, that's not something you strictly think of as user management, but um, it certainly applies. We're starting to do more with like analytics. Um, and so like our dashboard has some basic analytics information, but like I was quoting the Paul Graham growth article, and like 5 to 7% is good. It's like, okay, well, we know for our customers, what percent is their retained usage growing at um, every week. And so why don't we get that in the dashboard and contextualize it with, by the way, Paul Graham says this is good. And so we're doing some fun stuff around that. It really is uh, you know, a holistic approach. And that's where we are today. But the roadmap is maybe even more exciting to me of like, we get all these customer requests for, hey, can you integrate with Stripe? And so like generate the Stripe customer ID on behalf of our customers and, help them kick off a checkout session um, that has like the customer data populated. Can we tie that, if the customer is on a plan, can we tie that into our backend helpers, right? So it's not just authentication, who is the user, but also authorization, like what role or what plan are they on? What entitlements come with that? We've started dabbling in like organization management. And so that idea is like, if you're building a B2B SaaS, your customer is not just a user, it could be this organization. Um, that organization is going to have many users within it. They're all going to have roles and permissions. Like, can we contextualize our auth, middleware helpers with that information? Can we pipe the data into, your CRM and help keep, HubSpot and Salesforce synced with like the source of truth of your user base? So I think I don't know, there's this element of it almost never stops. Or at least we're so still like we're 4 years in, but we're still at the beginning. Like so barely have started. So yeah, that's how I define it today, how I think about it going forward.
No, I think that's true. And I think that's true for every single company. When you look at it, it's like still, there's so much ahead. And as you mentioned, off like evolves and the tech around it evolves. Um, and the
Shockingly
problem
quick,
was that?
right? Doesn't it? It just evolves shockingly quickly. Like just in our lifetimes, right? Like we started with username, password, then we needed email verification, then we needed OAuth, then we needed 2FA, and then like SMS 2FA wasn't good, so we needed the QR codes. It's just like thing after thing. Uh, uh, yeah. So anyway,
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I mean, we're evolving to a good way. So like, I mean, 2FA with like message and like with text message is not as safe, and
hmm
so we're improving. The attacks as well improve. So like,
yeah,
if you think about it, um, like everything evolves. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is the security. We were talking about attacks and whatnot.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the security side of, Clerk? Because there are developers that think, oh, okay, like it's simple to implement off, but there are so many different types of attacks, you know.
Yeah. Um, there's a ton. I think one thing that's interesting, well, so there's like two surface areas the way I think about it. There's the authentication surface area, which is just like, yeah, you mentioned SMS 2FA is insecure, and uh, you need to make sure in your implementation that even if you have a phone number on an account, like unless a developer or unless an end user has actually configured that phone number for 2FA, they shouldn't be able to use it. Right? You shouldn't end up in a situation where they have TOTP, the QR code set up, um, and they're able to bypass it with a phone number unless they're doing that deliberately. And so part of, I mean, really all of this is just ends up being configuration and following best practices. Um, um, uh, but like, what else do we do on the auth side? Like, have I been pwned, right? You need to look for breached passwords and make sure you're not letting your users have breached passwords. There's, uh, I'm sure that there is more. I mean, you need to store your password correctly, right? It's like you shouldn't be putting it in a database with a in plain text. It's hard because like some of these things sound obvious, but like we've had customers migrate to us from plain text passwords, from MD5 hash passwords. It's just like haven't been secure in I don't know, like a decade. Um, then then there's the session management side. I think the session management side is probably what trips people up more frequently. And there was this funny point at South Park Commons when we were just like doing bug bounties on um, just popular websites as a way to like it didn't really end up lengthening our runway, but like we did fix like a bunch of very popular websites, or at least alert them to like a misconfiguration of their session cookie. There's a lot of things you can do wrong, um, but for starters, just having it set as or having your long-lived session set as an HTTP only cookie, that helps with XSS attacks. Um, but then also making sure that that long-lived cookie is set is scoped narrowly enough that it's not going to leak to third parties. And so like a really common attack we see is or misconfiguration we see, I guess, is um, people will put the long-lived cookie on their root domain, and they do that because they have multiple subdomains and they want the auth shared across those subdomains. But then they'll also put like a blog or a status page that's like hosted by a third party on the same domain. And I swear, like the like honeypot that is like status page.io or whatever it is, like it's this tremendous honeypot because they are just getting so many session cookies um, sent to their service by way of people, dropping the cookie on the root domain. Um, you know, we use this hybrid model of both stateful and stateless auth, and so the long-lived cookie is this HTTP only cookie, but then we also have a script accessible short-lived token that we use for stateless auth, and that only lasts a minute. And the reason for that is like, okay, if there is an XSS attack that is going to leak, someone can exfiltrate it and just take it away and start making requests with it, basically. Um, but at least once that XSS gets fixed, they're only going to be able to make a request for up to 1 minute after the XSS is fixed, which ultimately like is not that different from uh, if you only had an HTTP only cookie. And then the benefits of that are when we auth against your backend, it's like instantaneous, right? It's this 1 millisecond auth instead of needing to make a network request to Clerk, which, even if we did it on the best, most distributed architecture in the world, like it's really, you might be able to get sub 20 with some degree of reliability on response times. There's going to be like a ton of variance, and it's just like, okay, why don't we just do it stateless, get the refresh going on a band, and it's better. Uh, yeah, there's all sorts of attacks. I can kind of keep rattling them off.
I think that's good. Another thing that I think it's interesting and important to cover, and I think that's a trend, is with passwordless, right? And I mean, you mentioned
Yeah.
that it might be in the roadmap because of, there's user requests and things like that. But, Apple released Passkey. I mean,
Yeah.
I think in the past year, and it, for users, it might be better, because they don't necessarily need to
Yeah.
write down a password somewhere where it's leaked, and it's not a shared password, and the user experience is also much better and easier for users. Can
Yeah.
Have you seen any trends regarding those two?
Yeah. I mean, so the passwordless trend has been going on to me for a decade already, right? All right, let me explain. Uh, so we don't support passkeys today, but like it's over 50% of sign-ins do not use passwords. And the reason why is Google primarily. Uh, so Google OAuth, if it's there, over half of your users are going to click it, and then they're not going to need to enter a password. Um, in B2B contexts, like especially at the enterprise level, that's also true today, right? Like it's SAML is normally the protocol rather than OAuth. Um, but enterprises all use it's called an IDP, an identity provider. Most popular one is Okta, and they basically enforce in their SaaS buying processes, like we must configure SaaS, and all of our employees must use SaaS, or no, configure SAML, and all of our employees must use SAML to access this SaaS. Um, and that trend has been going on for a long time, to the point where it's already well over 50%. I think it's very impressive that Google has pulled this, like even in consumer context, Google's pulled off over 50% market share. I think across our data, like I don't have global data, but across our data, that's true. Um, and I think, passkeys, it is I think it's a better UX, right? And so to me, it's going to win. And it's just a matter of at what time. um, I like this iteration a lot more than I think Apple did. Like, or there was a way to configure like Touch ID, but it was tied to a specific device at one point. And then they also did sign in with Apple. Sign in with Apple has this hilarious like implementation detail that makes it so all of the I'm formally known as like an identity person. Identity is like broadly our space. I think it's a funny term. Um, but all the identity people hate sign in with Apple because of the like privacy preserving email thing that they do. And the reason why is everyone tries to do account deduplication. And so if you originally signed up with email password and then you click sign in with Apple, if you're doing like privacy preserving emails, you always end up in a separate account. Um, and then they did this thing where, like, if you have any OAuth on your phone, you have to also support sign in with Apple. Um, and I'm pretty sure, don't cite me, I didn't like do research on this, but I know of like several big properties that literally took off a lot instead of opting to put on sign in with Apple because this is such a huge issue of like people ending up with duplicate accounts. And so that was a big mistake. I think Passkeys looks a lot better structured. And then the way people are configuring it, where it's normally a post sign up action, but then it's available on the sign in. You're able to tie it to existing accounts better. It's just solving a lot of problems. And so yeah, I'm optimistic about that for sure.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. I mean, that might be a reason why Apple signing didn't take off as much because they solve a problem that users have, right? That's like they might want to remain anonymous and things
Yes.
like that, but it doesn't solve the problem for businesses that want to have uh, accounts that unique
Yeah,
accounts.
it's funny. I think the businesses were sort of willing to give up the ability to email people. They're more willing to give up the ability to email people than they were to give up or to opt into basically this whole set of account challenges because that'll that ends up in your support channel. It's really hard uh, to just you can't. It just doesn't. It just didn't work. It makes sense, but yeah, it's a funny problem. I agree.
Cool, interesting. Um, so, I mean, you talked a little bit more about, the way passwords are moving, and that's an interesting trend that's been, happening for maybe at least a decade. But there are trends in terms of what kind of, so like there's some developers that like Next.js, there are some developers that, prefer other frameworks and things like that. Have you seen any trends there in developer usage and things like that?
Just like associated with passwordless, like do
Not passwordless, but
oh
frameworks in general, like so Next.js, maybe React, like
yeah, I mean they are growing hand over fist. Like yeah, it's crazy. Any of the React meta frameworks, and especially Next.js right now, like it's very impressive how fast they're going. And I honestly like I love how they're doing it too, where they've been so focused on performance and DX, and it's just gotten people to opt in. Um, but yeah, like if you look at the NPM trends on these frameworks, like it's just really impressive. So that's far and like Next.js is far and away the majority of our um, customer base. Uh, yeah,
that's interesting. So you talked a little bit about these meta frameworks that are related, to React. What about Svelte and React and uh,
yeah.
yeah,
We um, I mean it's all good technology. I think there's two ways to answer this for me. One is just like as a technologist that likes these things, and then the second is like as a founder of Clerk, how do we handle it? And I think as a technologist, all of this stuff is just leagues beyond the way I started, and it's so great to see. Um, I think we grew up, or I grew up in this world of like, how do we separate concerns and how as in PHP with like Smarty templates or even Rails with views and partials, like separating the business logic from the UI. Like we tried our best, but it just never really felt great. And I think what React figured out um, is it's just better. Like I can build so much faster, and the end user it's like I can build faster, the end user experience is faster, my like code base is better organized, and everything. So it's just like I have zero complaints as a technologist, and I think the other non React, they're similarly doing very innovative things, right? Like Svelte, Solid, even Angular. Like they're sorry, there's a big truck going by.
No worries.
Um, all of the technology is really, I mean, it's just a lot of fun to play with, and like we have a JavaScript team that I've been I kind of move in and out of over time. Like we've played with all these things, and they're all just really really cool. I think what ends up happening at like a macro market level is often that people concentrate in one place. Right now, that's Next.js. Um, uh, and I don't think you can go wrong there, but the only place you're really going to struggle with the others is compat, like ecosystem compat, and part of like Clerk is part of that problem where we don't support um, every framework today. We don't support Solid. We don't support Svelte. We very much want to, um, and our team, I'd say, is not big enough to realistically support it. Our approach on that broadly is like we need to improve our lower level helpers so that like the community can um, better contribute to the effort. Even in Next.js world, there's or React world for us, a good amount of like tech debt has piled up just as we've figured things out as a company, and so we're all eager for like the next major version that cuts out a lot of that tech debt and hopefully starts to build a better set of lower level primitives. So even in React world, if there's a problem, it's a bit more realistic for an outsider to write a PR against our SDK. Like right now, it's really, I'm not going to insult our code base too much. It's a little crazy. Like if you don't have all of the um, knowledge of how it came to be that way, I think you'll struggle a bit.
Got it. Interesting. Uh, so another topic that I would like to talk a little bit more is about, GPT and all
Yeah,
this uh,
it's
the hype around AI. I think there's a lot of hype, but I think there's also some interesting trends there. So, for example, GitHub Copilot, there's a lot of usage there, and I've seen stats that state that uh, GitHub Copilot is already $100 million ARR business, which is very interesting to see. But I've seen also people commenting, "Oh, look, with ChatGPT or like Google Bard, we have developers that are 40% more efficient or whatever." Um, but at the same time, there are some trends recently. I think I've seen somewhere that the traffic on ChatGPT specifically reduced in the past, 2 weeks and whatnot. So that means that there is some churn there. I'm like we're seeing also, many competitors come to the landscape. So there's Google Bard. There's Inflection that released Pi and whatnot. But I mean, the first question is: have you noticed adoption of these copilots or these chat clients to help development right now?
yeah. I mean, definitely. I was on a call once with someone who was migrating to us, um, and he was just like, "Why don't I just have ChatGPT write the migration script?" And then it did. Like he like fed it our docs and it just worked, which was I mean it was totally wild to watch. And that was great. Um, I think as a dev, so like, will it end up impacting like the clerk business more than that, like assistance with getting everything set up? I'm not certain. I've been like, what's the right way? It's this is like the saddest part about working on an auth company for me is like everyone's having so much fun in AI right now, and I'm just like, gotta make sure I get passkeys done. Uh, again, like as a technologist, it's like, oh, okay, time this one funnily, but yeah, like we're seeing things like that. I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, it answers the question. Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think, yeah, I think it's a very hot field, but at the same time, you need to create value for the long
Yeah.
term, and
Well,
pursuing the hottest thing right now is not like, it's not necessarily the best allocation. But I think the question, the next question that I have is, I mean, we're seeing GPT-3 and then there's GPT-4 that people can use. I mean, I can, I would imagine that, 5, 10 years from now, we'll have model that's like 10, like GPT-10, that's, maybe 1,000 times bigger and better.
yeah.
And like, do you think that's going to affect like how people develop code? Is it going to be more abstract away? And like, how do you think that's going to affect uh, like engineering in general?
Oh, that's a fun question. I mean, it's like undeniably going to impact development. Uh, eh, so, like, I can tell you again, just like macro side, like the AI apps building on Clerk are growing so fast. Like, it's really unbelievable to watch. Um, and so there's something special beyond tech hype to me. Like we're seeing usage as well. And that's just been really, I never expected that to happen. Um, like when I started an auth company, I never expected that to happen. Like I didn't expect in 2023, like my fastest growing, like the fastest growing apps at Clerk would be AI apps. Like I never would have guessed that in 2020. Um, I think how will it change development in the long run is it's one of those things that's just like so hard to even map your head around. Um, right? Like to what extent will writing good code be actually writing code versus being smart about having AI help you write code? And I guess we're trending really far towards the latter there.
Yep.
Um, we're not there yet, but yeah, it's going to. I'm like all in on like the it's going to change all of our lives thing. I am pretty far in on the notion that it's going to be an assistant rather than a replacement. Um, and it'll make us more efficient. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't, again, I'm sad I don't get to think like more about it. But if you're building an AI app, we've got great auth for you. We will
That's
stop
awesome.
the bots. That's honestly, recently it's been such a big component of what we're doing is just stopping bots from like automating attacks against AI companies to like get free AI compute. Like, a lot of our time at this point is going to that.
That's very interesting. I also seen um, people Levelcio. I think. I mean, he's
Yeah.
a very famous indie developer. He created Photo AI, and he mentioned that he has seen churn on his AI app, and that's something that he has seen in different apps, or like he mentioned that some other people have seen that. Have you noticed that trend as well, like growth and some churn? For example, character.ai, for example, apparently they are doing really, really well, and I'm I don't think they're seeing as much churn, but
Yeah, I mean, like we definitely see like apps go viral and they come back down to earth a little bit. Um, I guess I don't really see the like AI toys as the future of AI as much as like this was a surreal thing. So I got married a few weeks ago and
congrats.
thank you. Um, but my photographer um was like taking a picture of us and there was something on the ground and she was just like, oh, like, because I was gonna move it out of the way and just like, get it out of the frame. And she's like, oh, don't worry about it. I'll just Photoshop it out. And I was like, oh, like generative fill. And she was like, oh, that's so funny. You know that. And I was like, you know that. Like, I don't think that stuff is going anywhere. Like, I'd be shocked if usage of generative fill is down. Um, yeah, I guess like Levels does like AI photo generation stuff, and like I think that I guess I don't know all of his products, but that's the one that's sticking out to me right now. And like, okay, like that would be fun to play with, um, and to pay for a bit and just like experiment. But yeah, I'm not sure. Well, this is I, I don't mean to be like, uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be like negative about the product, but I wonder like, is there uh, something going on with like the consumer audience that's trying it that's more it doesn't have a use case for long term use. Um, but I think there are just like workflow improvements like generative fill that are just going to really replace how people did things forever and for the better.
That's a super insightful answer. Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the last thing that I want to talk about is, the future of Clerk. So you've talked a little bit about maybe you're you're focusing on bot detection, and there's passwordless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you talk a little bit more about the future of Clerk, and maybe that's short term and then long term?
Yeah, so I think really at the top here I mentioned like long-term changes to user management where we start to pull in, a Stripe integration, a CRM integration, and really like fill out the things that are connected to your customers, whether they're users or organization customers, and likely start to dabble more in authorization. So not just who you are, but what permissions you have. Um, I think uh, that's what I really think of as the roadmap. Um, Bot detection is just a funny one because yeah, like since AI, like we had it a little bit with like SMS pumping fraud, and so um, there's this attack where if you can receive a text message, you can like get paid for it in certain geographies, and it's a form of fraud. It's very frustrating and annoying. But so we were dealing with that for a long time, and we had some like rudimentary bot detection stuff in. But then when AI started, it was, attacks to get free AI compute. And they're just so much more sophisticated. And, realistically, we're going to have a handful of engineers focused on that full time, seemingly into perpetuity right now, right? Like it doesn't really feel like it's slowing down. It's this crazy cat and mouse game. Um, I don't really think of that as like product roadmap as much as like it's like something that's kind of always been our job. Um, but yeah, like at Clerk, we really just want to help developers build their entire application faster. And, Auth was the starting point for us in large part because it's the starting point for developers, right? It's like one of the first things you used to do was build a user table. And now one of the first things you can do is install Clerk. Um, what we find when we look at the user table at other companies, established companies, is all of these foreign keys to all of these different services and tons of code that kind of glued those services together. And so we're just really bullish on the idea of how can we outsource that whole process, and ultimately just make it so developers are just so much more uh, so much more enabled. Bad word, but they're just able to move a lot faster. And like you should be able to flick these things on and off. And I think like Segment, as an example, had this great switch flick experience for analytics providers, but like that was very much analyzing data like after things happened. And we want to bring that experience to like originating action, right? Like creating a charge and flipping someone's uh, entitlements within the app and so on. So uh, big roadmap ahead. It looks roughly like that.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, it's really cool to watch you guys grow, and thank you so much for talking to me. And uh, I think we got cover a lot of interesting topics. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is really